Welcome. Fridays with Frank. This is a little bit different than what we've done up to this point. I must admit that I enjoyed asking the questions, and it's a lot more difficult to give the answers. What we're going to do is we're going to bring a couple people into the session as we walk through the next roughly 45 to 50 minutes. I do not have a script for the first time ever. I thought I would kind of tell you how this process works and then get right to the election. The people I've been choosing to participate in these are all known for being successful in their fields, whether it be politics, business, sports, music, culture. And I wanted people who had a point of view, but were not political. This is the first time that we're going to spend the hour, 45, 50 minutes, whatever it is, discussing what's likely to happen in November, the issues and legislation that we are considering over the next few days, few weeks, and frankly, the next 3.5 months. And I'm going to try to have this conversation in a peaceful and respectful way. You'll notice that I've kept open the chat room, and I'll be taking questions from you. And I urge you to ask if you have questions. You can enjoy the chat room. The other thing, and I've said this before, and I begin with this, which is on the 10th of January, I had a stroke. And so occasionally I do get tripped up, and it's why I've been avoiding doing this 1 hour session. It is much easier for me to be asking the questions than it is to be answering them. And so you'll notice that occasionally I'll mess up my S's or F's, but it's not for want of trying. And I've lost more than 60 pounds, and I've kept my head. So even though I've been doing a little bit less physically, I've been as intellectually engaged as I've ever been. So let's go to some of the data, and then I'm going to bring a few guests to you. And if you've got a question, please feel free to ask it. Let me take a look. Overall, if you average out the polling, and we include our work in this, right now Joe Biden has a 9.5% advantage. There are some polls that put him 12 to 15 points up. I don't believe them. I think that they show a lead that is too wide. Similarly, there's a Rasmussen poll, and I noticed that it's interesting. The only people who quote him is Fox News that actually show Donald Trump dead even. I don't believe that at all. Joe Biden has been gaining, and Donald Trump has been losing, and I'm going to give you several reasons why. And remember that this call is off the record. First, Trump has been dropping over the last few months among seniors, the people who are most likely to be affected by COVID-19. And in fact, if you analyze the age groups and the difference between now and Election Day of 2016, that is the biggest gap between where Trump is right now and where he was 3.5 years ago. And in fact, that gap is significant because seniors are the most likely age group to vote. They're the most energized. They are not the most extreme by any means. And they're not, even though they are very partisan, they're not the most passionate partisans. The most passionate partisans are the 18 to 29-year-olds, but they're also the least likely to vote. Those who do vote care deeply. They're not likely to change their minds. Among seniors, they've been drifting away from Trump, and their number one complaint with him is over COVID-19, how he's handled it, not the economy, not the education system. They are concerned that the pressure is on to open up, and that without a vaccine or even a treatment, they're nervous because they've been following the news and they realize that they are the most in jeopardy. So point number one, the biggest shift from 2016 to 2020 are seniors, those aged 65 and older. Number two is that the biggest shift over the last 60 days, where Biden was up by 4% 60 days ago, and now he's up by 9.5%, that biggest shift, and it's not a coincidence, it makes perfect sense, but you got to get deep inside the data, are white women, middle-aged, with school-aged children, and specifically with children between the ages of 5 and 17. And in fact, if you want to understand why Biden has gained that 5.5 points and Trump has lost, and we'll do undecideds in a moment, is that they don't like and they're very nervous about the schools reopening. I don't believe that the president fully understands, and I don't believe his staff fully understands and really gets just how nervous they are. In fact, in our polling, just over half are either extremely or very concerned about their children and about the schools reopening. And less than 1 in 4, 23%, either have very few concerns or no concerns at all. That's a 2-to-1 ratio of people who are nervous versus people who aren't. And the truth is, there's no one demanding the schools open. There's no one calling except for the most extreme 10 or 15% who are saying the economy must open, the schools must open, we must go back to normal now. That represents as few as 10 or as many as 15% in some states. Now, the Pacific Northwest is a little bit different. The Plain States are a little bit different. But we've seen a complete change of heart in a state like Florida, which Donald Trump is dropping and dropping and dropping like a stone. I know that's always the question I get from Billy Marovitz. He always wants to know, how is Trump doing in Florida? Well, I will tell you how Biden is doing is that he's gaining, and that is the largest swing state with the greatest shift in public support over the last 60 days. It went from ever so slightly leaning Trump to more than a 7-point lead for Donald Trump. And that leads me to a third point, which is that there is still about a 3 percentage point gap in the popular vote among the country overall and among swing states. And in the end, as we learned very graphically in 2000, and then again in 2016, the popular vote doesn't matter. That Hillary Clinton was able to win by almost 3 million votes in 2016. And that was what the final numbers were. And I want to emphasize it because you don't hear it discussed sufficiently. She won by 3. We've never had a candidate win by 3 million votes and lose the Electoral College. And that shows you how bad the campaign was waged. And I would tell you, I don't think that gap will close. I think that Donald Trump can lose this election by as many as 5 million votes, as much as 3%. In the end, he lost by 2.1. That he could lose by 3% and still get reelected. That said, there is no evidence that would indicate, with 102 days to go, there is no evidence that would indicate that there's been or there will be any shift in a campaign strategy. I'm going to do a lot of caveats here because I'm determined not to get this wrong. And I'm determined to be as informative for you as possible, to give you as much information that you deserve, that you're not getting from Fox, that you're not getting from CNN or MSNBC. The cable news networks don't discuss this. And quite frankly, the major networks don't do it either. One of the greatest problems in this election is that the people who are reporting it have a clear favorite. And so they see the election and what is likely to happen from a prism of their own politics. And so they're not showing you both sides. That Biden will have to win by more than 4 million votes, by 3% or higher, for him to win in the swing states, because they are on average much closer, not much closer, somewhat closer, a little bit closer in their polling. And unlike 2016, the media is now paying attention to it. The pollsters are now paying attention to it. And I'm not expecting an October surprise. And that's a question I got before this session began. In fact, to me, the most likely October surprise is what happens with the virus, with the vaccination. And I could definitely see at some point in October, even the period from the last debate in mid-October through the election, that a vaccine is introduced. Could that have an impact on the electoral results? Yes, it could. We have seen, go back to 1960, which was the first presidential campaign that was waged both with polling and with television as the dominant media. The election results changed significantly in 1960, 1968, 1976, 1980. 1984, Walter Mondale left the Democratic convention ahead, and of course, Ronald Reagan won it in a landslide. In 1992, Bush was 20 points ahead of Bill Clinton. In the end, Clinton won by 5 points. Bush's lead eroded all throughout September and October. As recently as 2016, Hillary Clinton was up more than what Joe Biden is up now, and she was up closer to the election. And so you cannot make a projection at this point. You can only talk about the factors, the key issues, the key groups, and what to watch. Next, I spent the day on Capitol Hill. In fact, I spent the last week on Capitol Hill. It is very likely that there will be another stimulus. In fact, I put it at maybe 85, 90%. I do not believe it'll happen next week. I believe the House will have to come back into session in August. They're very far apart on what they want to do. The Republicans are determined to get lawsuit liability reform passed. They're determined to get protections for schools and businesses that open up, and so that they're not vulnerable to lawsuits. The Democrats are determined, equally determined, to get money for states and localities, that they are committed to helping all levels of government, and they're afraid that these states may have to lay off government employees if they are not, frankly, bailed out. And that eventually the Republicans are going to have to compromise on that. Democrats are going to have to give liability protections. And because of that, you'll eventually get a vote. It is not going to be Mitch McConnell's $850 billion. It is not going to be Nancy Pelosi's $3 trillion. The expectation is that the number will end up at about 1.5 trillion. And I use that number because it is significant. We have never run up a debt, even after the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. We did not add this much debt to the economy that fast. And that in the end, whoever is elected president is going to have to figure out how they're going to close the debt, because we don't have the manufacturing. We're not producing the goods and services. And so you've got inflationary pressure, and you've got a debt crisis with the country pumping as much money as it can to keep stock prices up, to keep bond prices from collapsing. And with so many communities now shutting back down again, there's a reason why I'm speaking to you right now from Washington rather than LA, because I believe Los Angeles in the next 24 hours is going to go back to quarantine. It's going to go back to before stage one and basically stay at home. California is deteriorating. Florida's already deteriorated. Texas. These are big states. At the time that these decisions were made, it was only New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And then you had outliers such as Atlanta and Chicago. And now you see the entire southern part of the country, all the way from Florida to California, being affected by it. And both parties know that they have to put money into the system, but both parties know that there's no way to pay for it. With that as an introduction, I want to do one question that came to me before this session started, and then I'm going to walk through, take some of your questions, and I urge you to use either the Q&A or use the chat room. Just be nice to each other, be respectful of each other. My cause in 2020 is civility and decency and respect and humility, which you don't see in much supply in Washington, D.C., or frankly, anywhere in this country right now. And I'm seeking to have discussions like this where we don't tear each other apart. A few of you know that I've actually removed a couple people from these calls because they were unable to engage in a conversation in a decent way. I won't stand for it. And our president may set a bad example, and some people in Congress may set a bad example. It just happened within the last 24 hours. Not on my calls, not in my classrooms. That we will not have those kinds of conversations. You can be passionate and you can disagree, but you'll not be rude to each other. Senator Tim Wirth, very well respected senator from Colorado, he asked a question. What will Trump do in the hours and days after the election? What kind of levers is he prepared to pull to stay in office? I will tell you that I don't expect it. And it doesn't mean that he won't do everything he can to win between now and election day. And that doesn't mean that election day will be easy and clear and we'll have a efficient and effective vote count. In fact, I'm actually very nervous. State after state has no idea what it's going to be like when absentee ballots make up 40 or 50 or even 60% of the total. When states allow people to vote early, which is different. Early voting is different from absentee ballots. And I think that needs to be explained. And I actually think that the Republicans are making a mistake by discouraging absentee ballots because it means that their own voters won't request them. The Democrats talk about it. It's become part of the culture to ask for one, to not necessarily vote in person. And that could be 0.5% or 1% difference that the Democrats request the ballots and Republicans don't, and then something happens on election day and Republicans do not vote. I do not believe that Donald Trump will do anything to stay in office. I do believe, and it scares me, that we will have a different counting this time than we've had in the past, that we will not be releasing results at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., that it could take 24 or 48 hours. If you remember, we had an election. This time it was about 3 a.m. when Donald Trump was declared the victor. And by the way, I do take texts and I do respond that I should not have put forward that question because that's fear mongering. But that is a legitimate question that Senator Wirth asked, and it's a question I get in all of these functions, in all of these, whether it's Zoom or the town halls that I was doing before COVID or in the classroom, that people would ask that question. And it does tell you the mood of the electorate right now, and it does tell you the divisiveness of American politics, that significant people do believe that we are so divided and have such little faith in the candidates or the electoral system that they could see a breakdown. So I was beginning to conclude the Georgia balloting is a mess. Texas, it's unclear what percentage of their vote, and these are states now that are in play. Texas is in play, although I do think Trump will win it in the end. What percentage is going to vote absentee? What percent is going to vote early? It was suggested to me, and I think it was a reasonably good suggestion, that early voting should be counted in advance. So there's no reason to look at machines. There's no reason to tally that after all the polls have closed. They can do for early voting what they do with the exit polls, which is to do the counting and just embargo the results. And nobody knows what the total results are anyway. They only know what their precincts are. So that's a possibility to fix the system. Okay, now the greatest challenge for me is that I'm alone. And so I have to try to do this on my own. I'm going to do Zach Beyer because Donald Trump is going to release a short list of his Supreme Court justices, of the people who he would choose. And he asks me whether it'll have any effect on the election. I know that those of you who are supporting Joe Biden check up on Ruth Bader Ginsburg every single day, that you get a health alert from her in the morning and in the evening because you're really afraid. I don't think that they would have any way of turning around a vote, of doing the hearings as fast as they would want to do. Doesn't mean that they can't do it after the election, although the pressure would be so great. I remind people that on the election day, November 3rd, you still have more than 2 months where the previous administration sits and the previous Congress sits. So her health does matter, and I do see the Supreme Court as being an important issue. We have asked that. It is not one of the 10 top issues. It's not one of the 15 top issues right now. And in fact, this allows me to go into healthcare. By October 1st, I think healthcare will be the number one issue in America today. And I think that healthcare will decide the United States Senate. It may not decide the presidency, but the Democrats, with the public option, have chosen language, have labeled their option as well as any healthcare plan ever done. The public option is, in our polling, the number one way, the most popular way to talk about healthcare. Now, the actual program itself is not nearly as popular, although it has not been fully defined. So I hesitate to go deeply into that. But Democrats now have a 19-point lead over Republicans on healthcare. And in fact, the only major issue where Donald Trump leads Joe Biden is China. And where the Republican solution to a major problem is preferred to the Democratic solution, although Biden has the advantage here, is on the economy. But the issues such as deficit reduction, ending wasteful spending, tax relief or tax policy, those are simply non-existent. And one more point on this before I go back to the questions. There is no, the issue agenda has completely changed because of COVID. And with COVID, healthcare and health safety and the delivering of medicine and treatment in a timely fashion has become so much more important. And issues such as immigration or national security has dropped. The one issue where Trump has the advantage is China. And we may get into it if you want to later on. But Trump has a 3-point advantage on China, which is nothing. There is a video of Trump praising Xi for how China handled COVID. This dates back to February, so it's out of context, but Trump did say it. And Trump has a video of Joe Biden clicking glasses and offering a toast to the Chinese leader. And they're both in advertising right now, and they're both trying to show that their solution to China is tougher than the other candidate's solution. So I'm looking in October for healthcare to be the number one issue, for China and the economy to be tied for second. And I was asked by David Dahl, what are the top issues ranked in our polling? And I'm going to give you that answer. Economy, jobs, and cost of living is number one at 52%. And by the way, there are multiple answers. We give people a chance to pick their top three, and then we see which ones. The percentage I give you is those who picked in their top three. So economy, jobs, and cost of living is the only issue that more than half of Americans choose as one of their top three issues. Healthcare and drug costs and COVID-19 are tied at 38%. I think that they're going to merge into one issue by the time we get to October. And so that's why I believe it will actually be stronger than the economy. The next issue is racism and discrimination at 35%, and then nothing else gets over 25%. So right now, if the election were held today, people are going to vote on the economy, on healthcare and COVID, and on racism and discrimination. Healthcare and COVID are Democratic issues, Democratic strengths. The economy is a Republican strength on a congressional basis and a narrow lead for Biden. And racism and discrimination is a strongly Democratic issue. What comes next, which is in fifth place, is climate change at 22%, overwhelmingly a Democratic issue. And the next two are immigration and national security at 20%. And both of them, the Republicans have the advantage on. So Democrats essentially have the advantage on the biggest issues that are affecting America today. And by the way, Medicare, Social Security is only 17%. Education is going to become a significant issue. But when we did this 1 week ago, it was only 16%. Because in the end, the only people who care about education are people who have children of school age. And that one that is continuing to prove very difficult for the president, and one that is going to be probably the most important issue by Labor Day, and then it will die down as school goes on. So I want to go to Ronnie Ricebroad. Question is, who should Biden pick as VP? And that is, I know who I think he's going to pick, and I know who I think he should pick, and they're very different people. I believe now that Kamala Harris is the most likely pick, and we have a gentleman who's actually somewhere in the ether watching this, Senator Chris Dodd of Connecticut, who is on the vice presidential pick committee. I have no idea, but I know he's listening in because he wants to hear who he's going to choose. That's what the press do. They tell you who it's going to be, and then the candidate picks somebody else just to show the press that they got it wrong. I think Harris has got the advantage because she's been through presidential debates, but I also think that that's a mistake. And I know we got a lot of people on this call from California, and they know the senator very well, and she's popular among Democrats, but she is not popular among independents. She's not popular among swing voters. And quite frankly, she said something during the debates, after the debates, when she was interviewed by Stephen Colbert. And I wish I had the ability to show you this. And I do want to thank you all for coming on, because we got over 200 people. I'm watching the numbers. We got over 200 people participating. When I used to do this as a phone call, we never had more than 100. So I appreciate you dialing in. She told Stephen Colbert 8 times in 35 seconds when she took on Joe Biden and asked him whether he had acted with racial policies, not being a racist, but his opposition to busing was racial. Her defense of asking that question was, it's a debate. And I urge you, type in Kamala Harris, Stephen Colbert, and the word debate. And she says it 8 times, again and again, it's a debate. And then she laughs in the most phony laugh possible. You all know I know language. I also know body language. I study the way people react. I can tell you who's lying and who isn't. She said that with that fake laughter, and she's going to get hammered for it. Because if she would say anything because it's a debate, why should we trust her against Mike Pence? I think it's going to hurt her tremendously. And I actually think that of all the candidates the Democrats could pick, when you look at that debate, which is why you pick someone to win that debate, and arguably Joe Biden beat Paul Ryan, who was supposed to be a great debater, then he beat him in 2012, and that helped Barack Obama win his election. I think that she would be a horrible choice for the senator and for the vice president. Karen Bass, who is also from California, who is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, is a brilliant communicator. And she's got a heart this big and decency this big. And I would see her as a much better communicator, a much tougher debater, someone who the current vice president would have to be so careful in what he chose. I watch the questions that come up here, and I watch the questions here, and I'm being yelled at by Ray Farmer. And I want to tell him, go focus on the LA Rams, because you're going to have a football season, and you need to get them up for grabs. I'll read you his question so you see that this is not biased. How does Harris get hammered for lying and Trump is an habitual liar but gets praised for dog whistle politics? He doesn't, Ray. That's one of the reasons why I think at this point, Donald Trump loses to Joe Biden, because the public does not want that kind of that in your face. And I'm going to give you specific words in a moment, but I want to go to another question. This one comes from Jesse Scharf. What do I think of the work of the Lincoln Project? Is there room for moderates and non-Trumpers in the GOP? And then he also adds, is the Democratic Party moving further to the left, or is that just an optical illusion? The Democratic Party chose Joe Biden, but when you see the passion and you see the heat within the party, it's all with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And he just, by the way, Farmer just says to me, fair, back to football. You have no idea how cool this call is. They get a chance to interact with you all in a real-time basis. And Ray, good luck and have a good season. Jesse, your point is legitimate. The Republican Party has become the party of Donald Trump. The Democratic Party, even though it nominated Joe Biden, ideologically is the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC. Notice I say ideologically. A lot of people, a lot of Democrats did not vote for Bernie Sanders, even though they agreed with him, because they did not think he could defeat Donald Trump. They thought that he was perceived as being a socialist or too far to the left. They so desperately wanted to defeat Trump that they chose someone who was not their first choice intellectually, that they wanted somebody who could do it politically. So the party is very much the left. And by the way, I want to emphasize what happens in the Senate, because in reality, the election that I'm going to be watching is not the presidential. It's going to be the Senate. If the Democrats are able to take over the Senate, I believe that they will do the filibuster and change the filibuster rules from 60 votes down to 51 votes. And by doing that, it means that the legislation they propose can much more easily become law. So when you see the statements from Biden where he says that he opposes defund the police, but you still hear AOC talking about it, emphasizing it in many speeches, that you cannot dismiss that point of view, because the House is clearly in the hands of the Democrats. And if the Democrats take the Senate, then they don't have that stumbling block, and that the ideas of the grassroots party are much more likely to come to fruition. Sandy Kleiman, who actually took me to the hospital after I had my third incident in my head, so I have to ask his question. What is the most effective communication by Biden, the Democrats, the anti-Trump media, and to keep people focused on the facts and not to spin from the Trump side? That's a very easy question to answer. You don't really hear what Donald Trump is saying. You hear criticisms of him. All you have to do to test this is, when we're done with this call, many of you are on East Coast time, just turn on the evening news tonight, and you probably aren't going out. Watch and go back and forth, and in fact, record one channel and watch another. It's a great test. And do a time clock for how much time is spent favorably reporting on what Trump is doing, how much time unfavorably, how much time favorably for Biden, and how much time unfavorably. And do the math. They've been running this now for the last 6 or 7 weeks. They started this in the beginning of June. And of all the presidential coverage, 70% of it, 70% is negative Trump. And the next highest is positive Biden. And that's only at 15%. When you're running negative, a ratio of negative to positive of 70 to 15, you don't have to worry whether or not Biden's message is getting out, because the media is carrying it. And again, I say this as someone who believes that in the end, Donald Trump loses. But I believe that these candidates have a right to be heard, and the American people deserve a debate. And by the way, the idea that there might not be debates, I think, is horrific. And I also think it's pathetic. We all know that we're doing this on a Zoom call right now. There's no reason to see the debates. There's no reason for the debates for them not to happen, that we can do it on Zoom. So I am nervous that my Zoom just went down. And if someone can text me, who knows my text, whether you can still hear me, please let me know, because I show only 2 people that are in the queue. I'm still good. Okay. The next question is on cancel culture, and it's from Jesus Estrada. And Jesus is one of the best students at Verbum Day, won an awful lot of awards. Okay, you don't have to text me. I'm getting it. People are responding. This is good. And my numbers are repopulating again. So somehow the system went down. What are my opinions on today's cancel culture? I'm frightened about it. So you all know me on this call, and I can now tell that people are paying attention, because between the text and the notes on the screen and the questions here, you just filled it up. I'm considered to be center to center right, and I have trouble on some college campuses because some students don't want me to participate, and I think that that's pretty tragic, because I think students need to be educated from points of view that they don't necessarily agree with, that we should be able to disagree, and people should be able to make mistakes. I can go back and look at the things that I've said, and I regret some of it, because either it didn't come out right, or it was soundbited, or it was edited to make it look like something that it wasn't. But people make mistakes. There's no perfect situation. And I'm afraid that we don't want to hear from people we disagree with. Fox News, 94% of those who watch Fox voted for Donald Trump. 95% of those who watch CNN voted for Hillary Clinton. 97% of those who watch MSNBC voted for Hillary Clinton. That's not good. We are getting our news to affirm us rather than to inform us. And I think that that is frightening to me, that we are educated in our own points of view. And in fact, this is a good chance. We have got a special person on here, and I do not know if I can find him, but we have, and we do, Tristan. I'm going to try to bring you on now, because I'd like you to talk about technology. You've been invited, so hopefully you're still paying attention. Tristan understands more about Google and Facebook and Instagram than any other person that I have seen. He's got a better understanding. He was, in essence, the chief ethicist for Google. And here he comes.
Hey, Frank.
And there he is. Okay. I know what cable news has done to the American psyche. If we can, for 5 minutes, what is technology doing, and why is it undermining, or as you and I would probably agree, destroying little discourse in America today? And again, Tristan, if you can just give them 5 seconds of your background, give them 3 points.
Thanks for inviting me briefly on, Frank. Hi, everybody. I was a design ethicist at Google, studied at a lab at Stanford called the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab with the founders of Instagram, and have been kind of sounding the alarm for several years now on the effects of technology on the social fabric, and specifically the race for human attention that these technology companies, 5 technology companies, hold 2 billion of people's attention in their hands when they make design choices. And that the incentives to say, I as Facebook can't create an information environment that's just asking, how do we best support democracy? I have to say, what's going to get me that 40 minutes of your day? And a newsfeed that personalizes information to you with affirmation, not information, is going to outcompete a newsfeed that tries to give you challenging information to your worldview every day. And so all the companies are forced to provide you with what we call 3 billion Truman shows, these personalized channels where they just give you your own reality, because your own reality is going to be more profitable than a challenging reality. But Frank and I have had a lot of conversations about incivility as being obviously exacerbated by the social media phenomenon, because with Twitter especially, which is where all the journalists are, it's never been easier to take someone's short comment out of context and build a mob of the least charitable interpretation of what anyone said and said, can you believe that this person says this, or say some ironic negative comment? So it is fueling the hatred and indecency and incivility that I think that we're all feeling, is the problem here. And so it really comes down to the business model being so tied to whatever captures human attention, which again, Frank, the stats you were listing about Fox, 95% voted for Trump, 95% who watch CNN vote for Hillary, and so on. It's just that, but times even more. And then the problem is that because this attention infrastructure is jacked into the entire world, we're talking about 3 billion people and even languages the engineers don't speak. I was just on the phone with someone who's a Facebook insider talking about how Ethiopia is going to be the next genocide after the Myanmar genocide. If you heard about how Facebook's amplification of fake news against a minority group there led to killing tens of thousands of people in Myanmar because fake news was spread there, and there's no fact checkers in those languages because these are the emerging countries. Similarly, with countries like Ethiopia or in India, you have 22 languages in India, you have 6 languages in Ethiopia. Facebook doesn't have any resources. They're all focused on protecting the US elections. And so you wonder, why is the whole world going crazy and having more civil unrest and more bullying and more sort of toxicity everywhere all at once? Well, you have to ask, where are we spending our attention? And so long as it's, from one of these devices and news feeds and companies whose market caps of $500 billion are based on keeping your attention, we're going to see these effects. And so this is what we have to change. I don't know if you want me to say anything more, Frank.
So one more question. You're featured in a documentary that Netflix, I believe, is putting out in about 60 days. In fact, you're the star of it. What do you expect? We have congressmen and senators on here, and you are not a partisan person, which is rare. What do you expect Congress to do to address this challenge and to fix it?
Oh, unfortunately, it's a much bigger conversation, but for everybody's just knowledge, the film is called The Social Dilemma. It'll be out in the fall, hopefully about a month and a half before the election. And it's meant to kind of show the washing machine for the collective human psyche that our brains have been stuck inside of for the last 10 years. When you think about the effects of social media, you have to sort of pull back the clock and say, this has been a psychological experiment run on human minds for 10 years now. And especially in terms of policymakers on the call, the effects on children, because suicide rates and mental health rates of kids, and obviously just the corruption of the cognitive development of early childhood and early prefrontal cortex development is really screwed up by the fact that you have addiction being the business model of Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, et cetera, especially in COVID times. I know it's even more challenging. So I think that's the kind of bipartisan concern here, is that this issue is attacking the human psyche, which is underneath all other issues. Because if you care about racism, then it depends on what your news feeds have been telling you about racism. Either you got, Candace Owens and the black police officers saying all these black people got to stop complaining, or you got these other people, so the crazy Black Lives protesters, tearing down statues, or the least charitable views of that. The attention economy is steering how we perceive all these other issues. And if it makes it impossible to disagree, it's existential to democracy. So, there's a more complex answer about policy, but we're working on like an 8 can't wait style policy slate for what would fix the kind of a comprehensive technology reform that really protects and puts the interests of people first.
I want to thank you for that. I think it's an issue that no one's going to talk about between now and the election. You're trying to get it launched. I think it's important. The people who are on this call, and I know who's on this call, this stuff matters. And it's not sexy, but it has the potential to have a greater impact on your kids and on the next generation than just about anything we talk about. Tristan, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're going to disappear. And wow, the technology actually works. And by the way, we have on this call Congressman Flores from Texas. The only reason why I mention him, because there are a bunch of other congressmen who are on, is that he's actually watching us from a flight from Washington to Dallas. So although it's United, so it must be going to Houston. If you got a question, I think it'd be really cool for you to put it in that the question queue, because then we can say that it was a question delivered from 39,000 feet. I want to talk about a question from David Hunt and Patty Heaton, because I think it's important. You asked about COVID-19 and the reopening of schools and whether or not it's based on available science or whether it's politically motivated. So I'm going to answer it in a way that I think will be unsatisfactory to you, which is it is both. That the decision that the Trump administration is pushing very hard for schools to reopen, they have the science behind them, but they don't have parents behind them. I think I said at the beginning of this call, 51% of parents are either extremely or very concerned about sending their kids back to school. Only 23% aren't. And I think it really does. It's very hard to ask a parent to put their child in harm's way. The science suggests that the kids are going to be fine if they wear masks and socially distance. Congress is preparing and it's going to spend this money. I can tell you that both sides support it. Congress is going to provide the extra resources so schools in highly contagious areas can have an even greater degree of protection. And the science says that these kids are going to be safe. But it doesn't matter if the parents don't believe it. And so those state and local politicians who are threatening to or have closed the schools are actually acting in a way that their constituents want them to. And it does matter to them that they be responsive. The president has been pushing reopen, reopen, reopen up until 24 hours ago when he acknowledged that that the virus, that we were backtracking and that we'd be backtracking for some time. 64% of Americans want to prioritize health and safety. 18% of Americans want to prioritize the economy and our financial well-being, and another 18% prioritize both at the same time as a volunteered response. So 3-1, prioritize health and safety over the economy and financial well-being. And even when you add in both together, it's 2-1. So my answer, David and Patty, is that unless you have public support at this point, you are going against the wishes of your constituents. And if you get between them and their kids, or you put them in harm's way, they're going to punish you. And again, that's the reason why Trump's biggest drop in support over the last 60 days has come among moms of school-age children. And you can see it happening in the polling. Okay, let's go to another question from, I'm going back to the queue, and I want to do one that people are interested in. Steve Sosnick and several people are asking, what do I still believe the polls? His actual question was, people no longer pick up their phones or even have landlines anymore. How's that affecting the quality of polling? All of my survey research is done online, and that's a very good question. And I know, because you're in the financial field and well respected in that, I know that numbers matter to you. And so we ensure that our data matches by age, by gender, by education, by income, by region of the country, which is state by state, and then by partisan affiliation. We now weight by 6 different numbers, and we will not accept results unless they're within 1% of the most recent census data. So we have everything protected, everything tested. And typically what happens, there are some Trump people that will not acknowledge voting for him, but we have so many other questions beyond just Trump. And that's what most of your questions are here, is I will be very careful on election day in terms of reporting the exit polls, because I know how badly wrong they were. But I essentially believe the numbers that I'm getting because of the weighting. And the one number that you all want from this call is the one number that I'm least likely to report, which is who's ahead, Biden or Trump. The more important number for me, number one, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? That statistic matters to me more than anything else. Number two, is America better off today than it was 4 years ago? And by the way, on the first one, the public says yes. On the second one, the public says no by about 20 points. The third most likely number to indicate where the election's likely to be is right direction, wrong track. And that is as negative as it has ever been. That there's a 50-point gap between those who think America's heading in the right direction and those who think it's pretty seriously off on the wrong track. I can't believe that I still remember these numbers. This is all that I do 24/7. I will be woken up at 6 a.m. by someone trying to get the latest polling data, and this will go on until 10 or 11 p.m. So it's just been burned in my brain. If I never see a number after November 3rd, it'll still be too soon. And then the fourth number is job approval. And right now, Donald Trump's overall job approval is 39%. You do not get reelected, not favorability, job approval. You do not get reelected if that number is at 39%. You basically need a minimum 45%. You can now win without a majority of the population think you're doing a good job, but not when it's down as low as it is. And you guys can continue the conversation on the asking the questions back and forth, because I see Tristan is responding. I've got a couple other ones here that I want to raise before we end this conversation. Larry Eastland asks me, it's more important, or says it's more important to debate an issue without resolving it than resolving an issue without debating it. The issue now is whether we can solve any of these problems. And this is the ugliness of politics right now, which is that both political parties are more interested in getting the political advantage of keeping an issue alive so you can punish the other party than they are in resolving the differences, in finding common ground and actually doing something to solve the challenges that we face. So Republicans don't want to give people more money than they would otherwise get if they were working, because they believe, quite rightly, that people would rather take a check that pays them more, particularly people who are financially challenged, that if they can make more money by getting a government check. I understand why some would do that. And frankly, if you're trying to feed 2 or 3 or 4 kids, who wouldn't do it? I'm thinking of the reaction to it. I know that some people are going to be mad at me for saying this, but there are people now, 53% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And that stuff does matter. And if you are desperate, you'll do whatever you can that is legal to feed your family. And so I get why the Republicans are doing it. And no, they're not evil. And no, they don't hate the poor. They want work to pay. And they don't want to disincentivize people. Similarly, the Republicans are saying about these mayors and some governors who are saying to people, don't pay your rent, don't pay your mortgage, don't pay your credit card debt. It's okay. The issue with that is that it's creating a culture where you'll run up debt and there'll be no accountability. And that too is important. But I want to emphasize that more people want the government to bail out or provide a stimulus package by 2 to 1. The public still supports what the Democrats are doing in the House, and they are opposed to what the Republicans are doing in the Senate. So if you think it's bad economics, the public does not understand that. And that's one of the challenges right now. Do you do what is politically expedient because you think that this is going to elect your candidate for president? Or do you do what you believe is right when it might hurt the candidate that you support? So I want to, we got room for a couple more. If you got any other questions, you got to send it in. right now because we're going to end in 5 minutes. Will CDC opinions comes from Andrew Margolis. Will CDC opinion published yesterday entitled "The Importance of Reopening America's Schools This Fall" change the perspective of parents that I cite in the polls? Yes, if it's reported. Yes, if they actually get a chance to read it. What you see now in the New York Times, and I've been following this for the last 2 weeks, are headline after headline of how dangerous it is that the teachers don't want the schools open, the principals don't want the schools open, the parents don't want the schools open. That's what you're reading. The CDC, which understands this, and by the way, there are other academic institutions that have come up with the same findings over the last 2 weeks, that it is actually unhealthy for young people to stay at home for another semester. They already lost last semester. If they lose this semester, and some could even lose the semester afterward, that does irreparable damage to their learning, does irreparable damage to their mood, and this stuff matters. And I see that Margaret Spellings, who was Secretary of Education, I don't know how to pull you in. You know what? I'm going to try to pull you in because you can really, and I know we haven't talked. I hope you don't turn me down. I hope I can figure out how to do it. I'm going to try to pull you in to answer a question or two because I know parents care about this. So please accept the invitation, and hopefully the communication will work. This is what I wanted to do on these calls, which is when we had experts to be able to invite them in, but you have no idea how difficult this is to actually work the questions, to work the technology, to invite people. And I think that she's there.
Hey, Frank.
Okay.
Hi, Frank.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the national academies, the Pediatricians Association, many experts, and I do think that the education issues are getting a little bit short shrift because the Trump administration has so little credibility on all of these. But when it comes to child abuse and food security and learning loss and all of these things, there are real downsides. And I completely get what you're saying about safety. And that's why you're right. Parents have to have the options to weigh that risk reward themselves and have options to do that. One thing that's happening, you've probably seen it, is that the Trump administration is trying to use all this as a wedge issue into school choice. So that if public schools won't open, let's give vouchers so that they can take the funds to their private schools. That'll be interesting.
So if you're in charge and I gave you a magic wand, what would you do for schools in September? What policies would you do? How would you handle it?
Well, 90 or 120 days ago, I would have convened experts that were credible in the field and gotten some ownership from the world's greatest mental health experts, space experts, technology experts, on and on and on, that would give some clout and some credibility behind guidance to school districts so they're not having to work it out on their own. Secondly, I think the CDC guidance was lacking in that school districts are hungry for what to do when it inevitably a teacher will be infected, a kid. I mean, do they close for 2 weeks? Is it just the third grade? You know, how should they respond to these inevitabilities that are likely to happen? And school districts want and need cover on this public health stuff.
If you had kids in the schools, I know you don't, but if you had children in September, would you send them to public school?
In Dallas, Texas, I would not. In Bald Head Island, North Carolina, where I am, Southport, North Carolina, I probably would. So it depends on where you are and the health capacity and disease prevalence there.
I want to thank you for this. I've respected you. This is like great. I'm so glad that you made a comment that I knew you were here. So thank you, and we appreciate it.
Dismiss me.
Thank you. And by the way, it's like I actually get to dismiss a former Secretary of Education. That is so cool. But thank you. Okay, we are just about done. I was asked a question that I never answered, and I never want to duck a question. The Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project has hurt Donald Trump. The ads are very powerful, very negative, and they excite people. but for Joe Biden to win, and I say this as a way to close, and he cannot just win with Donald Trump using the wrong words. And in fact, I promised you this, and I want to do it with you because I want to provide you things you can't get anyplace else. And I want you to walk away feeling that the call was balanced. Donald Trump talks about law and order. The problem with that is that the average individual sees law and order as a policeman with a club beating up protesters. What the public wants is public safety. He talks about dominating the streets as though it is a show of force when the public wants safe and secure streets. You see the difference between them, that Trump is using over-caffeinated rhetoric to people who agree with him, but they don't want the damage. They don't want the confrontation that Trump seems to be calling for. Trump calls his supporters warriors. He should be calling them hardworking taxpayers. A warrior is someone who fights, which is what Trump wants to encourage. And I get that. But you ask those people who are undecided, and it's only 6% of the population, what do you want to be called? They see themselves as hardworking taxpayers, even more than the middle class, even more than working families. And I got one more. Trump repeatedly talks about the silent majority. You're supposed to think about it, but you don't talk about it. He's using language from the 1968 presidential race that was not spoken about back then. It was part of the strategy, but that strategy was not articulated. It was implemented. Trump had a great line at the convention: I will be your voice. That's what people are looking for right now. Someone to be their voice, someone who recognizes them, respects them, appreciates them, and someone who cares about them. And it's a great way to bring this to a close. And I'm going to bring in, I'm going to try, Richard Dreyfuss. I'm going to try to bring you on to this call because I know that you have been so active in civics, because I do believe that that is one of the greatest challenges that we have right now. And one of the reasons why we have these protests, one of the reasons why we have the divisions. But we need to end this call in 60 seconds. So hopefully you will come on, and hopefully we'll get a 60-second view of the effort to teach civics. I'm engaged in this project. I think it is so essential, and that more than a presidential outcome, civics more than just dealing with schools, that if we open them up and they're not being taught what makes America different, what makes America unique, what makes America special, I think civics is is a core requirement. And as much as he continues to do acting, and he's running out of time. So right now, I could just imagine what's going on in the Dreyfuss household as he's stumbling over, trying to figure out how to get into this call. Richard, this is your big break. Could you imagine if you had not delivered that great line on The Graduate? You want me to call the cops? Now here's your chance to tell 210 people just how important civics is, and I don't think you're going to make it on. So I want to thank you guys for participating. I want to thank you for your questions, and maybe he's in. Richard?
Okay.
You've got 1 minute, and really you've got 1 minute because this call will disconnect.
Thank you.
Civics.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I also say one of the reasons why Frank is always yelling at me for my lack of conciseness is because of what he just showed us for an hour, that he's ability to be brief, concise, and clear is clearer and more concise than anyone I've ever known. And he's always comparing the world to him. Well, all right, we all lose because he's the most. Now, to answer the question, it's simple. Nothing is simple. All methods of communication, except the ones that come from rage, are all learned things, so that one must be taught civility and be taught civil discourse, for instance. And if you don't get it taught by teachers in subjects like biology and home economics and literature, in the course of those classes being taught with the clear passion that their teachers have, then civility will not be learned, and people will yell, scream, and interrupt. And that's all they will do, because that's all they will know. And so we have to make an extra effort to teach the simple politeness of don't interrupt. If you interrupt someone when they're talking to you, you don't know what they're thinking. If you stop them from finishing their sentences, you can't possibly know what they're actually thinking. So lay back and listen. And by listening to a teacher talk about biology, you're indirectly learning about civility. And that's it. Without civility, civility itself becomes comparable to oxygen being taken out of the atmosphere, and we strangle and die without it.
I'm going to follow up with that. I'm actually going to keep you on. I'm going to let this run a little bit long, and I'm going to pull in a movie you did only because of what it represented. Mr. Holland's Opus reminded every student, I get emotional when I think about it, because it was such a great film. Obviously you're playing a role, but I know you feel that role. What can we do to reconnect students and their teachers, to reconnect parents to the schools, and most importantly, reconnect young people to America so they appreciate those things that are good about this country based on that role?
Okay, I think that first you have to realize that we're doing something very right in introducing the youngest of our students to glory tales about America. When you introduce kindergartners and first and second and third graders to America through the stories of Nathan Hale and Don't Give Up the Ship and Give Me Liberty and Give Me Death, those stories move children, move them and cause them pride, give them pride and give them feelings of affection. And although our vocabulary does not accept words like love and devotion anymore in schools, the feelings are the same. And so you have to start in the lowest of our grades, the earliest of our grades. And then when the human brain is capable of accepting the concepts, for instance, of metaphor or simile or film noir, that begins in the fourth grade. And that's when real history, articulate history, and articulate concepts can be taught and accepted. The problem or the goal should be that we want our children to be on America's side. We don't want the cynicism of 18-year-olds. We want the affection that you can raise up in a child when they hear, "'Twas here the embattled farmers stood when they fired the shot heard round the world." That's what moves children and moves me and you. And that turns into respect and devotion. And when we realize, yes, it's kind of trendy now to think that all Americans do is oppress somebody, that's simply silly. And we have done so much immeasurable good differently and better than any other nation in the history of the world. We are allowed that pride. And if we deny it, we're denying reality. So I think it's comprehensive. It has to start in the youngest of our children and continue without a break. We have not taught civics, meaning the study of government and the study of our government, which is different than any other government on earth, in 40 years.
One more. I got one more for you. How would you take your knowledge of, and I now want to do this, and I'll say to people that we will have a conversation with Richard Dreyfuss at some point over the summer. If Richard, you will do it. How do we stop the hate? And it's real hate. And it's bubbled over. It's not on the surface anymore. It is deep down. As someone who understands how people are motivated, as someone who understands how to communicate both anger and love, how do we prevent it? Or can we?
You can't. You can't. What you can do is teach. And when you teach, you have to teach with a certain level of integrity and honesty. And that means that you're not teaching Confederate history and you're not teaching Nazism. You're teaching American values that came for specific reasons at specific times and how different they were to the people at the time that they were invented. And contextually, you have to be willing to say, I'm willing to lose a lot of my audience because they think that we're talking against them. But that's been true since the very beginning. When we first put the colonies together to form a country that was willing to fight Britain for their independence, we knew that a lot of those colonies were promising with their fingers crossed. They didn't believe in it then. So what we have to do is just say, we are obligated to take our past into our present and give it to our future and let the chips fall where they may. These values will hold up, and they are holding up if they're taught. If they're not taught, then kiss them goodbye and kiss this country goodbye.
Well, Richard, I don't know if you remember Matuka Benjamin, but she remembers you. She was your teacher many, many, many years ago. So I feel like this is that movie where the actor wins the Academy Award and thanks to the teacher, and the teacher's watching at home. Everybody, I want to thank you for dialing in today, for watching, for offering your question. Richard, you and I will recreate this for an hour long before the end of the summer. We are done. And what a great way to end this session. So thank you all for participating. And we're over.